Hello, welcome to the channel Y Stories. Enjoy watching.
The years are flying by, daughter. I have no time to reach all my goals. It was a typical family gathering in the kitchen over a cup of coffee when the daughter and mother chatted about everything and nothing at the same time. In such moments, the conversation could truly be about anything. That old neighbor who had already passed 75 and had 5 cats living in her apartment, about how young people have become spoiled these days and how it wasn't like that in their time, and many other topics. But sooner or later, any conversation like this would shift towards the topic of the fleetingness of time, and this conversation was no exception. "What do you want to reach, Mom?" the 30-year-old daughter asked. Her name was Eulalia. She was a slender, but shapely young woman with dark hair, perfect facial features, and perpetually sparkling green eyes filled with joy for life. "Well, I wanted to do a lot, daughter." The pensioner waved her hand and looked at Eulalia. She immediately remembered how beautiful and attractive she used to be in her own youth. She thought that if she found her old photograph now and put it in front of her daughter, she would wonder when she had taken a picture in such outdated clothing. She really resembled her mother both in appearance and character. Now Sonora Saavedra, Eulalia's mother, had become elderly, occasionally picky, sad, and tired, but things used to be different. "Don't worry, Mom. You still have a lot ahead of you." Eulalia smiled and took a sip of coffee. "I wish I had as much ahead of me as you do." The elderly woman chuckled and also took a sip of sweet coffee. "Since last year, I've been planning to renovate the apartment. Time keeps passing, and I never get to it. I'm afraid I never will." "You'll have your renovation," Eulalia exclaimed. "Pancho is planning to take a vacation in June. I'll persuade him to help you with the renovation." "Oh, yeah, of course he will. I know your Pacho. You yourself said that on weekends, all his productivity drops to zero." "Mom, you're teasing," Eulalia smiled. "I'm not a fool either. I know exactly how to persuade him." Sonora Saavedra just smiled. "So, how are you planning to persuade him? Will you chase him away with a broom or something? He went fishing with friends last week. He promised to return by morning with 2 buckets of carp." Well, I didn't object. I had wanted to cook fish for a long time. And he got permission to stay out until morning. I thought, in the morning, I'll wake up, and by that time, he'll already be here. In the morning, I'll get up and cook those carp. Eulalia playfully clicked her tongue. And what do you think happened? In the morning, I wake up, go to the living room, and I see him lying there, snoring loudly. Sonora Saavedra tried to hold her laughter, covering her mouth with her hand. "I start waking him up," the daughter continued. "I keep trying to wake him up, but no luck. In short, he got drunk with his friends there, and in such a state, they couldn't fish. In the end, of course, there was no fishing at all. They just had a good drink in the great outdoors with the guys." Her mother giggled shortly, but immediately went silent. "Not only did he return without fish, Mom, but he also left the buckets there by the pond." "Yes, daughter," the elderly mother laughed. "That's how you fried the carp." "Yep," Eulalia took another sip of coffee. "Well, I just don't forget such things like that. After he comes back from his vacation, I'll remind him of it. He's still embarrassed about that incident. So, I'll give him the opportunity to apologize." "You're not a daughter, but a sly fox," Sonora Saavedra joked. "You take after me." Mother and daughter laughed and continued discussing various everyday topics. 2 days had passed since the pleasant conversation with her mother in her kitchen over a cup of delicious coffee. Eulalia returned to her daily life after the weekend, and her routine was back to work home, work home. She was a hard-working woman, so such a schedule didn't bother her at all, especially since she enjoyed her job. She worked as an economist at the local hospital. She had a good reputation among her colleagues, and she occasionally dreamt of getting promoted to the position of chief economist. Her salary was quite satisfactory, but there was always room for improvement. Her supervisor was a woman over 60, and lately, she had been talking about retiring. She was a pleasant woman, but she only appeared that way when she wasn't at work. During working hours, she, like any responsible manager, pushed her subordinates hard, including Eulalia, but it didn't bother the young woman. Returning home that day, Eulalia Vidal found her husband sitting on the couch, watching football and sipping on a cold beer. Francisco Vidal, her husband, was a regular working guy who, after a tough day at work, just wanted to relax with some beer while watching a minor football match. He would have been perfectly fine working at a brick factory, and it probably would have suited him, but fate somehow led him to achieve great heights in advertising within the city. He was 32 years old and had started working in this field 7 years ago. He had a mysterious fascination with marketing, and due to the lack of opportunities to showcase himself independently, he had to find a job at an advertising agency in the city. One could say that he ended up in the right place at the right time because just 6 months after he started working there, a large organization that produced soap approached the agency. They claimed to have developed an innovative soap that had not yet been seen, and they wanted to effectively advertise their product to recoup their costs. At the time, Francisco was only involved in developing the advertising plan for this organization as an intern or something similar. He didn't actually handle the PR work for the client, but he didn't miss the opportunities to gain experience and observe how the big specialists worked. He learned a lot during that time and even managed to make a small impact. He suggested the initial design for the logo for the soap brand, which his colleagues enthusiastically embraced. For this, he received a bonus and elevated himself in the eyes of his superiors. Now, after 7 years since Francisco started working at this advertising agency, he had risen quite well. He was now one of the leading specialists in the agency. Concurrently, he managed his social media accounts, which had also become relatively popular. He simply enjoyed life and earned a good income. But at the moment, as he sipped beer from a large beer mug and watched yet another football match on TV, he had no concern whatsoever. "Hi," Eulalia said, entering the living room, and only then did her husband pay attention to her. "Oh, hi. You came early. I was expecting you around 7. "Yes, they let me go early today. I submitted the payroll report for March. Sonora Palacio let me leave, but I'm sure she'll review it tomorrow, and she'll find something to nitpick." "Your Sonora Palacio seems a bit strange," Francisco commented, still focused on the TV. "She should retire. Every time you talk about her, you mislead me. Sometimes you chat with her as if you're old friends, and then she scolds you and almost fires you from work." No, she's a good woman," Eulalia replied calmly. "She separates work from everyday life. As my boss, she has every right to shout at me and scold me, but as just a conversational partner, I won't allow her to do that, and she wouldn't allow it either. I'm sure of that." "Well, we'll see," Francisco said with a hint of skepticism. "I don't really understand how things work over there. If I were the chief economist for the entire hospital, I'd probably behave the same way," Eulalia said as if ignoring her husband. "I'd talk to everyone like they're subordinates during work hours and be a friendly buddy during regular conversations." "Well, I don't know, see for yourself." Francisco had hardly taken his eyes off the football match all this time. He hadn't taken a sip of beer either. At first, Eulalia wanted to scold her husband in a typical wife's manner for buying beer again without reason, but then she decided it would be unnecessary. Let the man relax if he wants to. The main thing is that he doesn't get drunk. "Listen, Eulalia, there's something I need to tell you." He finally turned his attention to his wife, who had sat down in an armchair to relax properly for the first time all day. "I'm being sent on a business trip to Capital the day after tomorrow for 4 days. Can you manage here on your own? Do you think I'm barely managing with you around?" Vidal smiled. "As if you helped me with anything. I just follow you around and pick up your empty bottles." In response, Francisco also smiled. "Well, that's great. In that case, I'll be leaving the day after tomorrow." "So, what's this all about?" Eulalia asked. "It's some organization. I don't know what got into their heads. Probably just decided to have some fun. In short, They organized a competition for the best advertising agency in the country. They're covering the trip, accommodation, and everything else. What's the point of that? His wife looked at Francisco in confusion. I don't even understand it myself, but let it be. If I represent our agency well and manage to win $250,000, you know how they'll welcome me, right? They'll carry me on their shoulders, roll out the red carpet, and not long after that, I'll be promoted to assistant director. I'm sure there won't be any amateurs at the competition. It's a significant competition. And strong competition is a reason to push harder. Moreover, if I do well, I might even win. And if I win, more people will know about us, which means more orders, more potential clients, and more credibility among other agencies. Well, go ahead, good luck to you there, Vidal said with a hint of skepticism. Try to represent our region. I'll definitely give it my all. I hope it won't be some kind of typical wedding-style competition like drop the pencil into the bottle. I'd like to put in real effort. I love giving myself to my work. Just don't overdo it, Eulalia teased and got up from her chair. Do we have anything for dinner? Check, there should be something. She glanced into the fridge and realized that the key words in her husband's statement were should be. She smiled and turned toward the living room, which was combined with the kitchen, and gave her husband a knowing look from across the room. She almost laughed when she saw that he was still watching the match, paying no attention to anything else. You know, Pancho? I have a question. Can you survive these 4 days without me? The business trip did not go smoothly even during the preparation stage. On the following evening, when Francisco began packing his suitcase, his favorite t-shirt, which he loved wearing to various events because he considered it the best and most attractive in his wardrobe, mysteriously disappeared. He also couldn't figure out where his toothbrush had suddenly gone. It could have been the start of a typical children's fairy tale when the main character's belongings start disappearing one by one, and then he is transported to a mysterious world where he has to confront some enormous monster, heroically rescue his belongings, and perhaps even save a beautiful princess from a dragon. However, this was not a fairy tale but a critical situation since there was not much time left for preparations. Francisco had procrastinated until the last minute, even though he could have packed his suitcase earlier instead of sitting in front of the TV and drinking beer. The Vidals did not have any children. Neither of the spouses wanted to have children, they preferred to live life to the fullest. Therefore, it was a big mystery for Francisco how his toothbrush ended up in the kitchen drawer among the tablespoons, and his t-shirt, which he always placed at the very left of the closet, was now on the bedside table in the bedroom. Nevertheless, the missing items for his upcoming business trip were eventually found, the suitcase was fully packed, and the marketer was ready for the competition. On that same evening, he browsed the internet several times to refresh his memory, as even the most experienced specialists sometimes forget the simplest things. Now he was absolutely sure that he would win all the money. Eulalia also helped him as best she could. She motivated him, encouraged him, and simply expressed her confidence in him. This undoubtedly had a strong effect on the man. That evening, he was filled with motivation, the desire to do something grand and great, to come up with such advertising for something unknown that the whole world would immediately notice. His personal ambition was skyrocketing that evening. Only positive thoughts filled his mind, and it seemed like nothing could stand in his way. As is often the case with life's cruel tricks, the pursuit of the loftiest goals is often hindered by unforeseen obstacles that no one initially pays attention to, but later, when the time comes to confront them, they trip you up and make getting back on your feet much harder. The Murphy's Laws were in full effect here. Francisco initially overslept his alarm clock. His flight was scheduled for 11 a.m., and Eulalia had long since gone to work, as he, consumed by grandiose thoughts about being the best and most professional advertiser in the world, had spent the entire night with those same thoughts. He had gone to sleep rather late, outside his usual routine, and his body, accustomed to resting on a specific schedule, couldn't adjust to a different one overnight. Although his wife had attempted to wake him up when she left for work, he only mumbled incoherently, stating that he had an alarm clock and that he would make it in time. Remembering his unwavering confidence from the previous day, his woman thought he wouldn't disregard the time for sleep, so she calmly left the apartment and headed to her workplace. Francisco unconsciously took advantage of his freedom and continued to sleep. The alarm was set for 9 a.m., and he struggled to wake up with the loud melody, but Francisco simply couldn't resist hitting the snooze button. Yes, he, like all people unaccustomed to early rising, just turned it off. He woke up half an hour later, but those 30 minutes could be crucial. Fortunately, he had woken up at all. He could have easily slept until noon, and all his grand plans would have fallen apart. But his subconscious mind had sensed that not waking up at that moment would lead to dire consequences. Francisco opened his eyes, and he had only a split second, literally a fraction of a second, to savor the morning, a carefree life when not a single thought had yet knocked on the door of his consciousness. But this moment was so brief, so elusive and inconspicuous, that the sudden problems that immediately rushed and completely overshadowed it. Francisco immediately realized that he had overslept the alarm. He remembered that moment when, deceiving himself that he would just lie there for another 5 minutes, he had ruthlessly turned off the loud melody. He hadn't had a chance to check the time yet, and the uncertainty of whether he had overslept or not made his heart race, his hair stand on, and a shiver run down his spine. He quickly turned toward his bedside table and grabbed his phone with trembling hands to check the time. It was 9:27, and he had overslept by only 27 minutes. It was bad, but not as bad as if he had overslept by an hour and 27 minutes. Everything was certainly not going well, but it could have been much worse. There was still some time left for packing and leaving, and now Francisco could only hope that there wouldn't be heavy traffic in the city today. According to his plan, he should have been in a taxi by now, discussing random matters with the driver, but he had just woken up. He jumped out of bed, rushed to the bathroom to wash up, and here awaited him yet another so-called underwater stone that he had unconsciously placed in his own path the night before. His toothbrush was now in the suitcase, probably at the very bottom, so to brush his teeth, he would have to dig through all the things he had already packed. This would take additional time, which was in short supply, so Francisco decided that it would be better to spend 20 minutes in Capital finding some random stall to buy chewing gum rather than spending 10 minutes now searching for the toothbrush, brushing his teeth, and then repacking everything. So he simply washed his face, combed his hair, and rushed to get dressed. When he opened the closet, he stumbled upon another pebble, placed there by himself yesterday. His t-shirt, which he was supposed to wear to Capital, now lay in the suitcase, mimicking a toothbrush. He had to put on the first t-shirt he found, throw a sweater over it, because the weather in the Capital today was not the warmest, put on insulated jeans, and head to the airport as quickly as possible. He quickly ordered a taxi through the app, grabbed his suitcase, double-checked if he had all the necessary documents, bank card, and phone with all the chargers and headphones, and, making sure everything was in place, he left the apartment with a relatively calm mood. 4 days passed. For Eulalia, these days were the most free and independent. Finally, she could watch on TV what she liked, play music throughout the apartment while cleaning, cook something quick instead of something tasty, and live the life of a bachelor, but in a woman's way. Every evening, she would call her husband, reminding him that he was the most brilliant advertiser and marketer, that he would outshine everyone, take the main prize, return as a winner, and glorify the agency where he worked. And Pancho, in turn, complained about the contests they offered here. The organization of the event was not the best, and he even doubted if there were any prizes at all. In my opinion, they just gathered everyone here to watch how we come up with ads for paper or chicken eggs, just for fun, he said to his wife on the phone on the third day of his business trip. Well, you're a brilliant advertiser, Pacho, Eulalia exclaimed with a tease. Can't you come up with an ad for chicken eggs? It's elementary. Even a 3-year-old can do it. In response, Vidal laughed and changed the subject. Despite the fact that living alone was enjoyable for her, Eulalia still missed her husband and looked forward to his return. She believed in him, believed in his abilities and ambitions, and was sure that he would not let down neither her nor his employer. On the other hand, even if he loses, what does he lose? She thought when her thoughts finally reached the possibility of his defeat. Everything, including expenses, was paid by the event organizers. He didn't spend a penny on it, except for 4 days of his time. Although he could have spent that time on his daily and probably routine work, he chose to spend it in another city at an interesting, albeit not very, event. To this question, Eulalia approached philosophically, but still rooted for Pancho. Although he was a simple worker at heart, he knew how to achieve his goals, but he didn't know how to lose, so after each defeat, he took a long time to recover emotionally. So, 4 days passed, and the young man, keeping the intrigue almost unbearable, returned to his homeland. As soon as the plane landed at the airport, he called his wife and said he had returned. Usually, from his voice, it was immediately clear whether everything had gone well or if he had stumbled somewhere, but not in this case. His voice sounded confident, perhaps even spirited and cheerful, but at the same time somewhat tired. This did not provide a clear understanding of the situation, so all that remained was to wait for him at home. The next day was a weekend, and Eulalia decided to visit her mother, Senora Saavedra, again. It had become a tradition. Every week, on the weekends, she would come to her mother's to sit and chat over a cup of delicious coffee, which the elderly woman liked to drink. After coordinating with her mother over the phone, Eulalia made sure her mother was ready to receive her as a guest and had no plans that her visit might disrupt. She then called a taxi and headed to her mother's place. The ride was short since Senora Saavedra lived not far from her daughter's place, and within 20 minutes, Eulalia arrived at the same apartment where she had grown up and spent her youth. Every time she entered the familiar courtyard, she couldn't help but think that time was indeed fleeting, and soon enough, she would be sitting in her own kitchen, thinking about all the things she hadn't accomplished yet. The old abandoned sandboxes, overgrown with ivy and cobwebs, evoked mixed feelings in Eulalia. First and foremost, she remembered the carefree childhood days when she didn't have to worry about work, salary, and unpaid bills. She immediately wanted to reconnect with the friends she had grown up with, gather the same group after almost 20 years, and play in the sandbox or indulge in tag, ignoring the gazes of passers-by. But there were other memories that Eulalia tried hard to push away. Memories that made her feel sick. Memories that immediately triggered panic and anxiety. Memories she was afraid of. Her father. Each person has their own definition of this word, and it usually spans many pages in the imaginary biographical book. For some, it's hope and support, a hero and an authority figure, the breadwinner of the family. Of course, for some, it's just some letters that don't signify anything special because they either never knew their parent or had seen them only a few times. Some find irritation in these 4 letters because they know about their father from their tearful mother's stories. But for Eulalia, it was an entirely different story. For her, it wasn't just a painful memory. It was literally a malignant tumor in her memory, a large and black blot on the pages of her biography. He was probably the only person she wouldn't help if she saw him on the street with a sign asking for food. She wouldn't feel any daughterly emotions towards him because she knew about him not just from her mother's stories. The life of the Saavedra family, which was the surname of Eulalia's mother and her own maiden name, started quite well. Just 10 months after their wedding, Rita and Pablo welcomed a beautiful and naturally talented daughter into their lives, a daughter they had never even dreamed of. When Rita returned home from the maternity ward, Pablo swore that he would provide for the young family as long as he could stand on his own 2 feet. Those were tough times, especially for their family. Pablo Saavedra, who had joined a tractor factory right after his military service and worked as a fitter, had great experience in the field. He never expected that the new owners of the enterprise would lay him off as easily as snapping their fingers. For a long time, he held on to the hope of returning to his job there. For some reason, he couldn't see any other prospects for stable employment. But soon, the factory closed down. While it was in its last months, the man found ways to make some extra money wherever he could. He had a car, and from time to time, he worked as a taxi driver. He also took on odd jobs as a loader at the nearby grocery store. And all this time, he just looked at the factory where he had worked for over 10 years. When the factory closed, the last glimmer of hope in the man's eyes flickered and then disappeared without a trace. It was as if his life had lost all meaning. He didn't know where to find work anymore. As time went by, he began to blame his wife for everything. He said that she had chosen the worst time to have a child. He accused her of ruining his life, and if it weren't for her and their daughter, he would be bathing in gold right now instead of living on borrowed money. That's how the Saavedra family lived for 6 years. When little Eulalia turned 1, Rita had to go to work herself. She worked as a baker at a bakery, and in 1 month, she even received her salary in the form of the very bread she baked. Money was in dire shortage to support herself, her little daughter, and her perpetually dissatisfied husband, but the family somehow held on. Some more time passed, and things began to disappear from the house. At first, Rita couldn't find her old china set, a gift from her friends from France. Then, pieces of clothing started to vanish. It reached absurd levels. One evening, when Rita returned from work and picked up her daughter from their neighbor, whom she had been leaving her with, she didn't find the TV at home, and along with it, Pablo had evaporated from the apartment. But she still held on to hope that he would return, and everything would be all right. She had a deluded confidence that things would work out. Her Pablo would find a job, and the family would live a happy and joyful life again, but that was never meant to happen. The family's situation deteriorated over time, and her husband started disappearing more and more frequently. The last time Eulalia saw her father was when she was 6. She vividly remembered their last meeting. It was a summer morning, not too hot yet, and a cool breeze was blowing. A pleasant warm atmosphere filled the air. There was half a watermelon in the fridge, and the little girl asked her mother to cut her a few slices. By that time, her father hadn't been home for several weeks. Eulalia didn't pay much attention to it since she hadn't seen much of him since infancy. But for Rita, it was a matter of concern. She worried about her husband, a kind of Stockholm syndrome. The young woman cut a few pieces of watermelon for her little daughter, and she sat down at the table to enjoy the delicious red fruit. At that moment, voices of elderly women gathered near the entrance, a common sight in the mornings. The Saavedra family lived on the 2nd floor, so everything was clearly audible. They were scolding someone, berating a man for something. There was silence in response. Eulalia didn't listen closely, but subconsciously, she understood where it was headed. Meanwhile, Rita felt a chill running down her spine as she waited in anticipation. Intuition didn't fail her, and after a few seconds, the door to the apartment creaked open. A very thin man appeared in the hallway, his face covered in wrinkles. The hair on his head was already starting to fall out, and his legs could barely carry him. He walked into the kitchen. "Oh, here he's back," Rita Saavedra said disapprovingly, not looking her husband in the eyes. "I'm back," he replied indistinctly, approaching closer. "Why are we so unhappy?" He was clearly very drunk, as even Eulalia, sitting at the other end of the kitchen, could smell the alcohol on her father. "You've been away for a week," the woman muttered. "Where have you been wandering? Have you seen yourself, Pablo?" Thin as a pencil. "I'm perfectly fine," Pablo yelled after standing still for a whole second, digesting what he heard. "At least you all here are well-fed, right?" He cast a contemptuous glance at Eulalia, who was sitting peacefully at the table, eating watermelon. Inside, she was a little afraid of her drunk father, but for some reason, she was sure he wouldn't touch her. "Look at her, she's feasting here," he said to his daughter, "while Daddy is getting skinny, and she's indulging herself." "Shut up." Rita's patience had run out, and she poured out all her emotions that had been building up inside, right into her drunk husband's face. "What are you spending money on? Booze and drugs? Do you think I'm a fool? Do you think I don't know why you've lost so much weight so quickly? Hell no. He's not eating enough, they say. You're boozing and getting high all over the place, and we're to blame, huh? Shut up, you cow." The man yelled just as unintelligibly. "I'm the man of the house, and I'll decide what to do and what not to. And you should close your mouth and cook me something to eat instead of babbling nonsense. And you, daughter, move aside." Let Daddy have something to eat. Eulalia was sitting there, watching this scene, feeling like a little spectator in a movie theater. She didn't even move. What did I tell you, kid? Pablo began to move towards his daughter. Don't touch the child. Rita pounced on her husband with her fists and started pushing him towards the exit. If you don't respect yourself, at least respect others, you jerk. Get out of here. You calm down, you prostitute. Pablo shouted even louder, and it seemed like the entire stairwell could hear this another family quarrel at the Saavedras. I want to eat. They won't let me into my own house. Pablo clenched his thin hand into a fist as tightly as he could, despite his drunken state, and, regardless of his condition, he swung, and domestic violence was a regular occurrence in their family. There were many incidents Eulalia could tell about, but this one was the most severe and painful, but it was also the most memorable, mostly because it was the last. Eulalia's father had indeed been heavily involved in substances in the weeks leading up to that moment. It was unclear where he got the money for them and through whom he acquired them. The police weren't particularly concerned with this matter back then because all the policemen at the time were primarily focused on filling their own pockets. But his physical condition and drunken state didn't prevent him from abusing his family. Eulalia was also a victim then. The drug addict was greatly offended that the little girl didn't want to share her watermelon with him. On that day, they went to the hospital, and both of them got stitches. After that incident, neither Olia nor her mother saw Pablo again. He left home and never returned. It has been more than 20 years since then, but during this time, he never made contact, and thoughts that he might not be in this world anymore had certainly crossed their minds multiple times. Since then, Olia could not tolerate betrayal. Learned from her bitter personal experience, which primarily included that incident with her father, and reinforced by her mother's repeated stories, she was not ready to forgive any betrayal. She understood her mother's mistake during her youth, enduring regular beatings and scandals from Saavedra, yet forgiving him every time. Olia didn't want that. She was ready to sever ties even with the closest person if they showed even a hint of treacherous behavior. This memory, triggered by an old sandbox overgrown with ivy and cobwebs, quickly came and went, literally in a moment. Olia relived that moment once again and tried to push that memory as far away as possible. After settling the fare with the taxi driver, she got out of the car and hurried into the entrance. Nothing has changed here since then, she thought involuntarily and immediately closed her eyes. She didn't want to remember. Sonora Saavedra met her daughter at the doorstep, put the kettle on, and they sat in the kitchen. The first question Margarita usually asked Olia when they met was about her well-being. Olia replied as usual, fine, and then proceeded to share all the recent news in her life from the past week. Mom, my Paco was in Capital this week. I was thinking whether to call you and tell you or wait for his arrival, began Olia. Why did he go to Capital? The woman asked with bewilderment. They sent him there on a business trip for 4 days. He's already back. There's this interesting event there, as he told me. Some organization decided to create a competition in which advertising agencies from all over the country can participate. In this competition, there are several parts, several contests, and they compete to create the best advertisement. And is this a business trip? Sonora Saavedra asked skeptically. Yes, Mom. I was shocked when I heard it. It's really some kind of madness. So, the grand prize there was won $250,000, and only the first place counts. There's no second or third place. So, did your Francisco win? Sonora Saavedra's expression showed that she was very skeptical about this news and had doubts about its truthfulness. And here's the most interesting part, Mom, emphasized Olia and turned towards the stove, where the kettle was whistling. Just a moment, daughter. Tell me while I pour the coffee. Sonora Saavedra got up, went to the stove, and continued to listen to Olia. I've known him for many years, Mom, but I seem to have missed something. He can't lose, not at all. And when he suffers any even minor defeat somewhere, when he doesn't get the expected result that, in his opinion, would justify his efforts, he starts to get very angry. He really starts to worry, get nervous, and so on. And here. And what's here? Asked the elderly mother, placing 2 teacups on the table and taking her seat. Well, here's the thing. He's happy. He didn't win anything. They did give this money for the winner, but he didn't get that. Even though he really wanted to, he was very motivated at the start, but with such motivation at the beginning, if he lost, he would whine like a little girl and scream into his pillow. But he's happy, Mom. Well, maybe he changed his mind. It happens to everyone. When you're anticipating something grand and then, when you see it firsthand, you get disappointed. I thought the same, but it's not a reason for happiness. He's beaming, Mom. And I can't find any reason for his happiness because nothing particularly pleasant happened to him during these 4 days. Have you asked him why he's so happy? Senora Saavedra took a sip of hot drink. I asked, replied Olia. He says he's just happy to be back home. But something tells me that something's not right here. In general, I need to watch him for a while. Somehow I feel like I've been deceived, and skillfully at that. A week passed since Vidal returned from the business trip. Strangely, he had been in a joyful mood all week, even though there were no visible reasons for it. Olia only had suspicions about why he could be so happy. Perhaps he received some good news and was keeping it a secret from his wife. However, she expected him to share it with her at any moment, but he didn't. He just walked around the house, smiling, and even when he was late for work or stayed late, he still came home with a smile, overflowing with happiness. It seemed like he had found $1 billion or discovered the secret to perpetual happiness, and what made him happy was not just knowing this secret, but the fact that he was the only one who knew it. She couldn't shake the feeling that her husband was really hiding something. One evening, when Olia's patience had run out, she approached her husband and began bombarding him with questions about why he was so happy. He simply waved his hand and continued to smile while making himself a cup of coffee. It was all very puzzling. This trip had changed Pacho significantly, and it seemed like a different Vidal had returned from Capital, not the one Olia knew before. In other words, it was nothing like Pacho's typical behavior. Several more days passed. Olia returned from work and saw her husband sitting with a beer glass in hand, watching a football match on TV, just like the evening when he had told her about the business trip. Today, her day had been particularly busy, and she didn't feel like arguing at all. Let him watch. What do I care, she thought tiredly and walked into the living room. Hi, Pancho, she said and sat in her usual armchair next to the sofa. Hi. How's your day? Pancho asked with a smile, lowering the TV volume. Wow, thought Olia. When was the last time he lowered the volume for me? This is strange, very strange. And he's interested in my affairs. No, something is definitely not right here. Olia hesitated to mention that her boss had scolded her today because she thought her husband might not be interested in that. She felt he had asked the question to share something. Everything's fine, how about you? Excellent, Olia, he exclaimed. You won't believe it, they're sending me on another business trip. It's like a dream, Olia. She looked at Pancho with a puzzled expression. Since when did he get so excited about going on business trips? And why so often? They had assigned him some dubious event again, where he would feel like a clown performing for the organizers. 2 questions battled for priority in Olia's mind, but she decided to start by asking why he was being sent on business trips so frequently. After all, there were other employees. Why you again for the second time? She asked quietly. You were away just a week ago. Why can't they send someone else? This is absurd, Pancho. Well, because I'm the employee of the month. They want a worthy representative of our company at such significant events, not just anyone. Still, it seems a bit much. What's the event this time? Listen, it's like this. There's a gathering of representatives from advertising agencies. I don't have all the details yet, but they'll be discussing cooperation, sharing experiences, and so on. It's a really cool opportunity. The boss is thrilled that we're participating. Pancho, this sounds like a scam. No, Olia, it's not a scam. Yes, of course, I'll cover the expenses for the trip, accommodation, and everything, but it's not a big deal. Besides, I'll gain valuable experience. And then there's a higher chance of getting promoted to a deputy. It's a career boost, Olia. You can't imagine. A career boost is when an entire company is transferred to you immediately and they hire the best employees for you, she said, rolling her eyes. Pacho, please don't go on this business trip. Olia, I can't refuse. It's mandatory from the management. And honestly, I really want to go. You know, an opportunity like this probably comes only once in a lifetime. What kind of opportunity, Pancho? Olia was beginning to get annoyed. An opportunity to attend some insignificant event for which you have to pay yourself? No, seriously, it's all great, but it's also very foolish. It's not such a fantastic opportunity. Olia, there will be such specialists there. The best marketers in the country. I can't miss this event, really. I'll tell you honestly, I could decline the trip. They gave me a choice and either I go, or they take Tono Alvarez instead. And why should I give such a golden opportunity to Tono Alvarez when I can go myself? Despite all my respect for him, no. I won't hand over such a juicy morsel to anyone else. All right, Olia conceded. When is your business trip then? I always get a day's notice, so it's the day after tomorrow. The day after tomorrow, Olia repeated in a hushed tone, as if pondering something. All right, I understand. In that case, I wish you the best of luck in gaining experience. Thank you, dear. Thank you. Pacho reached out to his wife and kissed her on the cheek. Now, he added, please, prepare some food, and smiled. Mom, he's practically bursting to go there. Olia's voice was infinitely puzzled. It seemed like her brain was about to explode from not understanding the situation. As it happened, she could hardly discuss the problems that had piled up with anyone but her mother. Sonora Saavedra played two roles for her at once, that of a loving mother and that of her best friend, with whom she could discuss topics like all men are jerks and the like. Today, this topic was on the agenda. Tomorrow, Pacho was supposed to leave on another business trip, the legitimacy of which Olia didn't particularly believe in and had strong doubts about. She had no idea where he might actually be going, but it definitely wasn't to some dubious gathering of advertisers in Capital. That didn't sound convincing at all. Her first thought, like that of any sane woman, was something along the lines of he's cheating on me. But then it crumbled and fell apart into atoms. Why? Because Olia was sure he loved her. Yes, he might not demonstrate it as openly as she wished, but she was convinced of it. She didn't need to hear from him, darling, I love you, or sweetie, how did you sleep, repeatedly. She valued actions more than words, and Pancho did demonstrate through his actions that he cared for his wife. Maybe he's just going there to hang out with friends? For 4 days. That also doesn't fit. The solution here was different, and it seemed incredibly simple. Right now, Olia and Sonora Saavedra had both switched into Sherlock Holmes mode, trying to dig into every tiny detail they could grasp onto, hoping to unravel this mysterious ball of doubts. Why wouldn't he be eager to go? He probably found himself a mistress there, and he's bouncing back and forth while lying to you. Mom, as I've said, it's highly unlikely he has a mistress. He's just not that kind of person. I'm just having trouble believing it, honestly. Well, I can believe it, the retiree insisted. How do you know what's on his mind? And why is he so eager to go there? Mom, how can you imagine an average worker having a mistress? I'm talking about his mentality. He's just not inclined to have a mistress, I'm 100% sure of that. Then what does he need there? What do you think he really goes there for? with such genuine interest. Has he traveled frequently for work before? Does he have enough work at home? Mom, what are you talking about? Olia tried to calm her down. He has plenty of work at home. And what does he need there? I don't know. Maybe he's tired of family life? Maybe he likes traveling? Have you ever seen an average worker who also likes to travel? Someone like him just wants beer and football. That's it. He doesn't need anything else, no work or intellectual pursuits. Just sitting around. Well, nevertheless, Mom, he works. I came to you for help, not to hear what I already have some idea about. I want to hear your point of view. You already know my point of view. He goes there because he found himself a mistress. And do you think no women will pay him any attention? A young, handsome man, 32 years old, and with money. Oh my. Mom, no, that's not it, Olia protested. Olia, you're also doing it wrong now. Sonora Saavedra looked straight into her daughter's soul, simply by looking into her eyes. You say that you came to hear my point of view. I express my point of view, and you say that it's not it. You came here to hear what you want to hear. But the truth is always bitter, Olia. At that moment, Olia felt her own wrongness. Only now did she realize that her mother was right. Her certainty at the moment made no sense because Pancho could really be going anywhere. But still, the girl continued to doubt that her husband was cheating on her. Mom, well, let's reason logically. He never gave any reason before. He was never seen with any other women. He doesn't seem inclined to cheat. Now let's look at it from another angle, her mother said. He went on a business trip to Capital once, and now he's going for the second time. What's the second reason to go there? An advertiser's meeting? And he thinks you'll really buy into that? Well, yes, the event is very strange. I agree with that. Nevertheless, we have no reason to suspect him. I just can't wrap my head around how that could be true, and it's very unlikely to be true. Sonora Saavedra sat silently for a moment, looking absent-minded and tapping her fingers on the table, then sighed and looked at her daughter. You know, Olia, instead of building all sorts of guesses, we'd better go and check on him. And how do I check on him? Go with him? Olia was surprised. No, I have work end. What does that have to do with it? The old lady waved her hand. You know how clever and enterprising people do it? They buy radio bugs, put them in a suitcase or pockets, and then listen. Like a miniature recorder that will tell you everything. Olia, wide-eyed, looked at her mother and felt a smile gradually appear on her face. Mom, have you been watching spy movies? In response to this, Sonora Saavedra just smiled. In general, the plan was indeed workable. To slip a wire into her husband's suitcase, one that would record everything that happened there, was the perfect scheme. Knowing Pancho, there was no doubt that he would put his suitcase in the room where he would sleep. So, all the juiciest details of his trip, which the pseudo-detectives were trying so hard to find, should surface in a couple of days. There was very little time left to carry out this cunning plan. Right now, to implement it, she needed to quickly get these radio bugs somewhere. So, mother and daughter decided to gather and head to the Vidal's apartment. Francisco was at work right now, so they could safely plant the listening device without any danger. They stopped at the nearest electronics store on their way. It could be more aptly called a stall reminiscent of the past, often shown in modern films with a nod to the old days. It was a rather shabby place that hadn't seen repairs since good old times. However, there was a lot of merchandise here. There were several generations of radios, various antennas, microphones, speakers, and the like. Of course, it couldn't do without bugs either. Olia paid for 2 devices around $200, after which she thanked the old man with round glasses who managed the store, and she and Sonora Saavedra went home. Pancho was supposed to return closer to the evening, around 5 o'clock, but he could be released earlier to give him a rest before the trip, so everything had to go quickly and without difficulties. Actually, that's how it turned out. Quickly finding Francisco's suitcase, Sonora Saavedra and Olia stuffed a small radio bug into one of the compartments behind the zipper. They needed to place the second one somewhere else, just in case the first one suddenly failed or accidentally fell out, which could happen. Digging through the suitcase, the ladies realized that there wasn't really a suitable place for it. They needed to find another one where the backup bug would work just like the first one. That's when Sonora Saavedra came up with a very good idea: hide the bug in the inner pocket of Francisco's jacket. The only downside to this option was that Francisco might hang his jacket in the hotel room's closet, but that wasn't guaranteed. Just as likely, he might simply toss it on a chair because he was tired after a hard day and didn't want to do anything except lie down. And that was only if he actually went to the event and not to some beautiful young mistress. Now that both bugs were placed in their designated spots, they needed to clean up the crime scene. They could have gone to Sonora Saavedra's house right now to test these bugs, but the radio salesman had warned them that they couldn't listen to them in real time. It was like a tape recorder. You could only turn it on and then turn it off to listen later. Of course, when they set up the bugs, they turned them off, and these little radio spies were fully ready for work. Here we go. Now we'll check where your Pancho is going and what he plans to do, Sonora Saavedra said somewhat discontentedly. I never thought I'd ever help my daughter eavesdrop on my own son-in-law. Deep down, Olia still hoped that spending money on the bugs wouldn't be in vain. Listening in wouldn't provide any results, only confirm her point of view that her husband was simply in a good mood and wanted to take a break from their dull, everyday life for the second time. But that was yet to be discovered. In the evening, Francisco returned home as usual and, as always lately, was in a very good mood. Olia was at home at the time. Today, she decided to take a day off from work, using the excuse that she wasn't feeling well. On the contrary, Francisco rushed to work in the morning as if an instant promotion, a bonus, and so on awaited him there. In the evening, he hurried home as if the same awaited him there. It seemed that nothing could ruin his excellent mood now. While Olia waited for her husband to come home, she, of course, sat and contemplated the upcoming event. In just a week, their family could either be brutally shattered with no chance of recovery or continue to exist, but even stronger. If none of the pensioners' suspicions came true, Olia's love for Francisco would grow several times stronger and never weaken. Olia sat in her usual spot in the armchair in the living room in front of the television and watched some lady's melodrama about unhappy love. The plot of the movie strongly resembled her situation. The husband went on a business trip, and then the wife found out that he had cheated on her. "Hello," a man called out as he entered the living room. "How are you doing?" He approached his wife from behind and grabbed her shoulders. "Hi. I'm doing well. How about you? Do you have any good news or? Why are you so cheerful?" "Yes, dear, there is good news." "And do you know what it is?" "It's that frequent business trips will earn me a bonus." "Yes, management has decided to reward me in this way." "Oh, that's good," Olia said indifferently, because at that moment, for some reason, she began to feel a strong sense of distrust. She was bothered by her husband's overly good mood. Previously, he rarely had such a mood. The next morning, Pancho got up in the same great mood he had when he went to bed. It was nothing like last time. He didn't oversleep and didn't snooze the alarm. He didn't say, "I'll sleep for just 5 more minutes," and didn't do anything like that. On the contrary, he woke up with great enthusiasm and motivation to go even earlier than Olia. This could have been a very good reason to make her morning coffee or breakfast in bed, but Francisco didn't seem to need that. He seemed to have forgotten that he had a wife. Yes, a wife. Lately, he saw her not as a spouse, but as someone who covered his back while he was on the front lines, or rather, just an interesting conversationalist whom you couldn't get rid of. Although he did find a way to disappear. Because he seemed to have stopped seeing Olia as his wife, which happens to many ordinary workers who only use their women to have them cook for them, he gradually stopped paying attention to her. But he hadn't been like that before. They had met 9 years ago, and their acquaintance was painfully random. At that time, both Pancho and Olia were studying at the institute. It was a hungry but insane student time. Sometimes Vidal even missed those fun moments she experienced when she was a student. It was impossible to experience it all over again, but no one forbade her to dream and imagine that she had gone back there. She often liked to remember the case when one of her fellow students, in a semi-drunken state, tried to climb through the window on the third floor of the dormitory because the doorwoman, who was on duty 24 hours a day, stopped letting people in after 11 p.m. The whole dorm watched, and everyone just fell over laughing. Even Olia, who felt sorry for this guy all the time for some reason because he was getting bad grades from the teachers, couldn't help but laugh. In the end, the guy did manage to get into his room in the dormitory, but he was severely reprimanded when this information reached the institute's management. On one of those days, the student Olia was returning to the dormitory after a party. The time was already approaching 10 p.m., and she didn't worry at all about being late. She only drank on holidays, never got too high, and always behaved politely and respectfully, so there was no reason for the old hag of a doorwoman not to let her in. She was already approaching the institute's territory, on which there was both a dormitory, and she was just about to turn to enter the gate, but here disaster awaited her. The institute's territory was quite extensive, and even had its own small vacant lot. It so happened that the management constantly lacked funds, so building a proper, full-fledged fence on the other side of the plot was simply impossible. Because of this, stray dogs occasionally sneaked onto the territory, and hiding for them was quite easy. The entire institute's yard consisted of the educational institution itself, the dormitory, and a small park for walks. The rest of the territory was occupied by trees, among which these very dogs roamed. In the evening, when there were few people around, it so happened that these same dogs became bolder and sat behind the fence near the gate, as if waiting for someone to pounce on. Usually, stray dogs don't allow themselves such behavior, as they know they have entered someone else's territory, but this time, everything seemed to be deliberately set against Olia. Two medium-sized dogs, however, began to bark at her and then started to approach her. At that moment, she had already entered the territory, and upon hearing the loud barking of the two dogs, she immediately headed towards the dormitory. She hoped that someone was standing outside or sitting on a bench and would help her, and she was lucky. At the moment when she approached the dormitory, a young man with a windbreaker slung over his shoulders came out of it. He had a cigarette in his mouth and a lighter in his hand, and for some reason, he was looking around. He was looking for a group of boys to approach and smoke with. But there was no one, and all he noticed was the barking of the dogs. At first, he didn't pay much attention to it, but then, when he realized that the barking was getting closer, he immediately caught on and ran in that direction. As he reached the path leading straight to the exit from the premises, he saw a girl running at full speed, chased by two animals. The young man, whose name was Francisco Vidal, rushed towards her, and when they crossed paths, he didn't stop. He continued running towards the dogs, who were taken aback by his unexpected move. As he approached them, he started waving his legs, scaring the animals, and they ran away, looking back fearfully. "Look at that, huh?" he said, watching the dogs as they fled. "When are they going to fix that damn fence?" Then he turned to Olia, who had stopped and was catching her breath, and approached her. "Señorita, are you okay?" he asked, not taking the cigarette out of his mouth. "I chased the dogs away." "Did they bite you? Are you all right?" "Yes, thank you," Olia replied between breaths. "I'm fine, they didn't have time to bite. Little bastards. I'm going to talk to Sonora Montero about this right now. Let them solve this problem with all their management. I don't care if they're short on money. I'll weld that fence myself, just give me the equipment." He didn't pay attention to Olia and walked towards the dormitory to have a serious conversation with the doorwoman. "Wait!" Olia shouted. "What does Sonora Montero have to do with this? She's just the doorwoman, she doesn't decide anything." "She can reach the rector," he yelled in response. "So let her reach him. How much longer can this go on?" That's how the communication between Olia Saavedra and Francisco Vidal began. They started greeting each other when they saw each other on the street, then slowly began to talk and converse, and eventually, after some time, they announced to everyone that they intended to date. During one of their early meetings, Olia jokingly asked him how he envisioned his ideal life. In response, almost without hesitation, he said, "My ideal life? Well, it's when I do nothing, and money just flows into my pocket by itself." Olia laughed heartily at the time, considering it a humorous response to a playful question. However, the reality of married life showed that he genuinely aspired to that. Just sitting, having a beer in front of the TV, that's all he needed. A simple life without complications, no additional self-improvement or hobbies, no interests or even occasional entertainment. Pancho didn't need anything beyond the standard routine of a man after work. All those days when Pancho was on a business trip in Capital, Olia was on pins and needles. She couldn't sit still, knowing that soon she would find out one of two possibilities: either Pancho was so cheerful by a random turn of events or some personal experiences, and he went on a business trip solely to get a break from everyday family life, or he had found another woman on the side, with whom he seemed to enjoy much more than with his own wife. The situation was further exacerbated by the fact that Pancho didn't answer his phone. He didn't call himself either, which was also alarming. Days passed, and he finally returned home. His mood was just as joyful as it was before his departure, but there was an additional detail that had crept in, one that could initially be ignored and overlooked, but it was there to spark in his eyes. He wasn't just cheerful and happy, he was genuinely content, as if he had been missing that spark in his eyes all along. And the same spark had disappeared from the eyes of Pablo Saavedra, Olia's father, when he was fired from the tractor factory. The only difference was that her alcoholic father couldn't find a similar spark in anything anymore and couldn't regain happiness, while Francisco managed to, and that was all Olia was interested in now. How? She didn't bring it up out loud, she just drew her conclusions. All that was left was to discreetly retrieve the wires from Pancho's suitcase and jacket, which were hanging in the hallway. Opening the suitcase, she immediately tried to feel in the darkness for the compartment with the fastener where they placed the first bug. She found the compartment, unzipped it, and a delicate female hand slipped inside. Got it, Olia thought, and she immediately pulled out the first radio bug. Then she closed the suitcase back up and put it back in its place. All that was left was to retrieve the bug from the jacket, which was hanging in the hallway. And it was even simpler. Both small radio devices were now in Olia's hand, and she was ready to rush to her mother in the middle of the night. However, she had already warned Senora Saavedra that she might come at night, and her mother knew about it. Olia turned on the phone, which she had taken from the bedroom, and checked the time. The hour hand was approaching 1 a.m, and now the girl faced a choice: either listen to everything herself and not disturb her mother, or take the risk of waking her up if she was still not asleep and go to her to listen to everything there. And she decided to take the risk. "Well, come in," Senora Saavedra said in a half-whisper, because the soundproofing in the cold corridor was far from the highest level. The time was already close to 1:30 a.m. Her mother was not asleep and was waiting for her daughter's call. And the daughter came with all the tangible evidence. Now the show of the century was about to begin. "First, check if they work at all," the woman said, putting the kettle on when Olia sat down at the kitchen table and placed both bugs on it. "They work, Mom," she replied. "See, the LED is flashing here. It's green, so everything is fine. Do you remember how the seller explained to us how to listen to them? There should be speakers here." "Yes, I remember," Olia replied in a tone as if she had just remembered something and hurried to get up from the table. "Just a second." She went to the hallway and returned from there a few seconds later with the phone in her hand. "I'll connect them to the phone now, and we'll listen through it." "Go ahead, because I don't know how all of this works," Senora Saavedra said, glancing at the bugs and then at the phone. After a few minutes of fiddling with the phone, Olia finally managed to connect to the bugs. "Well, let's listen," she said with a sigh and pressed the button. The bugs had been recording for several days in total, but in the app that worked with them, you could choose the most interesting moments. AI could recognize the essence of human speech and guide the user on where to rewind to hear what they desired. "Thank you, my dear," Francisco's voice sounded through the noises. "I knew it," exclaimed Sonora Saavedra. "I just knew it," she repeated, but this time separately. "Quiet, Mom," Olia said sadly. Her inner world was falling apart right now, and she realized that her mother had been right all along. He was so joyful not because of any changes in himself and certainly not because of some business trip, but because of his mysterious lover whom he had exchanged his wife for. "Well, darling, I'm off. Call me when you need to, but for now, sit back, enjoy the most expensive beer and the most interesting football match." Here's the voice of his lover. "I should have bought a camera to know what this wretch looks like," Olia thought. Her nerves couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed the phone and stopped the recording. "Daughter, what's wrong with you?" Sonora Saavedra looked at her daughter in puzzlement. "Don't worry like that, Olia. He's just a dog, but you're the best for me." "I'm going to call him now and say everything," Eulalia said and dialed her husband's number. Time passed. Olia now lived alone in the apartment that Francisco had given her. It used to be their apartment, but now it was hers. The family had fallen apart, and there was no more family. What didn't suit Pancho and his wife? Why was he so happy when he went on a business trip? It's quite simple. Since that first meeting with his future wife, Olia, when she asked him about his ideal life, and he replied that the best life is when money flows into his pocket on its own while he does nothing, and nothing had changed. During his first business trip, he met the owner of the hotel where he was staying. It just so happened that she arrived on the very same day. The details of their acquaintance were unknown, but they both were satisfied with their first night together. After that, the hotel owner began to entice Pancho to her side in every possible way. She was lonely, not at all old, and quite attractive. She simply didn't know that he was deceiving her. Later, by the way, she would leave him when she found out what kind of scoundrel he was, and he would try to return to Eulalia, but Eulalia wouldn't forgive him. She didn't forgive betrayal. As for the second time, Pancho didn't have any actual business trip. Feeling that he could sit around and do nothing while being fully supported by his wealthy lover, he simply quit his job. She really provided him with everything, allocated a room for him in her hotel, bought him beer and food, various souvenirs, and so on. She even wanted to go back home with him, but he lied and said he was living with a sick mother. He fell in love with the free ride, quickly got used to the good life, and decided to risk everything he had, but he lost, and he lost big.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.